Whether it's around the country or your town or county, decisions are being made every day that impact real people and real communities. Welcome to the Rural View, where we open the window for you to view Wisconsin farmers and rural residents and get a glimpse into the challenges they face.
All right. Well, welcome to another episode of The Rural View. And today we have guest Erin Herbold-Swalwell. Hopefully I said that right here with
You
us.
did.
Well, why don't you just take a minute, Erin, and introduce yourself? Who are you? What do you do? Just give us an introduction.
Well, first of all, Amy, thanks so much for having me. This has been, farm succession planning is just a topic that is really near and dear to my heart. So, a little bit of background about me. I think I first and foremost describe myself as an Iowa farm kid. I grew up on a corn and soybean farm, had a lot of hogs and feeder cattle at a certain time until my sister and I graduated. My dad lost his hope. So this is something that I've grown up with. My dad has a lot of siblings. Some were farming, some weren't, and so it's been always been an interesting topic. So grew up in Iowa. I went to Iowa State University for undergrad, and then, as my dad liked to call it, the dark side, Iowa, for law school. But I loved it there. That was a great experience. My first job, real job, I'll call it my big girl job, was at Iowa State at the Center for Agricultural Law and Taxation. They had just started that center in 2008, and I was the first staff attorney there. So that's where I got to kind of bring my farming background and apply it to the law. And so I got to do fun things like fence disputes or talking to farmers about drainage law, water drainage law, or mostly, I think one of the biggest things that we really got questions from farm families on was estate planning and succession planning, and how do we do a better job of that? How do we learn from the past? What can we do to make this as smooth a process as we can for our family? So that's how I got into estate planning and transition planning. And so it just went on from there.
And as a farm kid, did you anticipate yourself being an attorney?
That's funny. I told this story the other day to somebody that asked me how did this happen? And I think when I left for college, my mom and dad, they told both my sister and I, if you're going to come back to the farm someday, which that was, a real possibility. And actually I'm back there now, living close to my mom and dad, but with my family. But my mom and dad said, you've got to bring something back that can help the farm and grow the farm. And so I became a lawyer. And I'm not sure that's what my parents meant when they sent me off into the world, but I think going to law school was sort of natural for me. I've always loved learning, and I was always looking for ways during law school that I could apply my farming background to the law. And so I was lucky enough to be able to work at Iowa State and do, the exact type of law that I love and work with people like my family and the people I grew up with. So I've been very fortunate in my life to be able to do that.
As a fellow farmer's daughter, I think sometimes, we like to steer our own direction and interpret direction from our parents, maybe a little bit differently than they anticipated. So I appreciate
Yeah,
that.
did maybe I went a little rogue on the advice of go bring something back. I will say that my father uses my legal services quite a bit.
I'm sure he does.
Likes to throw out legal jargon on a daily basis and say, "Well, my daughter will talk to you," things like that.
Yeah, I mean, as far as attorneys getting a bad rep, I'm sure they do, but when it comes to agricultural law, it's such a specialized thing, and it is truly needed. So,
Yeah.
if no one's appreciated you and what you do lately, I'm giving that to you right now as a big thank you for representing
I
agriculture in spaces that need it.
I will say I do love words of affirmation. That's really nice. But also I know I think, I've experienced these issues in my family just having these conversations with my family members, and I know it's emotional, right? I get emotional when I talk about the future of our family farm and how do we keep it going and what do we do? So it's definitely something that my job is and what I get to do really fills my bucket as well because it's a way to give back a little bit and a way to stay connected to agriculture and hopefully help people, when they see something that seems like an overwhelming process, make it less daunting and know that we're just going to take this a step at a time. And hopefully we get to maybe it's not the perfect result, right? Progress is better than perfection. Take it from a perfectionist, it's hard to
Mhm.
that's a pretty high standard, right? So I think I've learned over the years that just getting a start sometimes gets the wheels rolling and Rome wasn't built in a day. So, you got to chew off something every year and try to at least start the process and then it gets rolling.
Yeah, and I was able to sit in one of your presentations. We recently had you come to Wisconsin and do some succession planning workshops with along with Rural Mutual Insurance. And so
Mhm.
during that presentation, I remember you talking about a lot of the misconceptions people have about succession planning. And so I was just going to ask a question of like, why do you think people don't want to touch this topic? What's overwhelming about it?
Gosh, there's a lot of different things, and all of them are understandable, right? The first one that maybe seems a little bit obvious is we don't like to talk about our own death or not being around. And, like my dad and probably a lot of others, we don't talk so much about retirement. We talk about slowing down. Farming is a way of life and it's our legacy. And I think it's really hard to sometimes accept the fact that that will end someday. And so I think that's one thing. I think the other issue is maybe they've seen families that have, they haven't done it wrong, but they haven't planned as well as they should have. And so we all have a story probably growing up of a family that fought about these things where it tore a family apart. And I think sometimes you see that and it feels, oh gosh, I don't want that to happen to my family. Therefore, I'm not going to touch it right now. I'll do it when I have to.
Mhm.
And it's just easy to kick the can down the road, right? Because there's always something you can put before doing this type of planning, like, oh gosh, there's tax laws that are going to change. I should probably wait till Congress figures that out. And how long have we been saying that, right?
Right.
So I think there is about as figured out as they're going to be right now. And I always tell people come up with a plan and we'll work together to find a plan that's flexible enough that you can change it. This isn't, in most cases, set in stone. We know that in our lives, something changes. If you look back on your last 5 years, has there been a big change or something that's happened that you haven't anticipated? Of course there is. So, I mean, you got to sit down and kind of, go back over these things every 3 or 5 years. So I think those are the reasons people get a little hesitant and maybe they too get overwhelmed. You look in the plat book and you see, well, so and so set up a trust or so and so owns their land in an LLC or a family limited partnership or something like that. And you think, well, why did they do that? And which one should I choose? And I'll tell you, every family, and this may seem like an exaggeration, but it's really not. Every family is so different.
Mhm.
And the structure they're willing to live with may be totally different than the structure the neighbor down the road is willing to live with. So you really got to kind of take that part out of it. Take advice from your neighbors, your family, all of that. But I think you got to put it in the context of my family and I have to make this decision based on what works for us.
Yeah, and you kinda hinted at some of them, but what are some of the barriers that you just have to figure out your way around or through? Or, what are some of those things that you see people bracing for impact for?
Yeah, I think a lot of it. And my friend Amanda, that I do a lot of presenting with here in Iowa, she's really an expert of how do we have emotional conversations. I think as Midwesterners, sometimes we like to keep things we don't love conflict, right? I mean,
Right.
I would say I'm a very unusual attorney in that I really hate conflict, right? I just it's not my favorite. I have to do it as part of my job. I have to engage in that, but it's not the favorite part of my day, which is probably why I'm a planner, not a litigator or trial attorney, but I think that it's one of those things that the emotional part of it maybe stops us more than anything else. I mean, there's other components, right? There's financial, there's a big financial component. You're trying to focus on the finances and making your farm go. That feels more urgent than maybe it does trying to figure out how things are going to pass. So you can always find something that's more important. On the emotional side, though, I would say there's there's just sometimes when a family, you're just at a crossroads, you're trying to have these conversations, but they're not going anywhere. It's okay to ask for help. It is okay to bring in, and there are people that do this for a living. It's okay to bring in somebody like a facilitator. And maybe it's the emotional hurdles you got to get over first before you can decide, okay, what tools I want to utilize to be able to accomplish my succession plan. And that is totally fine. I do think we're getting better at having emotional conversations. Number one, because we've probably all seen that family that maybe
Sure.
the senior generation really held their cards close to their vest. And you'll find out when I die, or they may say something like, you guys will work it out. I'm not worried about it, because they don't want to have that emotional conversation. I think the next generation coming up behind them maybe has seen that and realized, I don't want to do that to my kids. And if I'm truly going to have the farm pass to the next generation, I've got to figure out a way to have those difficult conversations. And so I think it's getting better, but I would say that's probably the biggest hurdle that most families face is, maybe we have an on-farm heir, somebody identified, a child identified that maybe will take over the farming operation. When a lot of our assets are tied up in the farm, it's hard to figure out, well, what do I give the others? And we talk about fair versus equal all the time, but how do we make it fair for our children that aren't directly involved? And so I think that's probably one of the biggest things.
What would you say? So, you are looking to make the transition, or you know that your parents or grandparents are getting older. Like, what is like step one? Like, I think when it comes to this topic, everyone's like, I'm just overwhelmed. Like,
Yeah.
what do you encourage people to do? Step one, start here, and the rest will kind of start happening.
Yeah, there's things I picked up over the years. I've been doing this longer than I'd like to admit now. I graduated from law school in 2006, so your listeners can do the math. Um,
I
but
won't be doing math. That's not really my
okay,
specialty. So
thank
you're
you.
fine.
I'll be 39 forever. Wait, it used to be 29. Now I'm okay with 39. But I think some of the things that I think about where you can start would be, what about having a conversation about what you need to live on in retirement, what you and your spouse need? What are your goals? What does that actually look like? And you don't have to call it retirement. We can call it that phase down or slow down period where maybe the kids are starting to rent the farm, or whatever you want to call it. What do I need to get through that period of my life? I think that when a farm family sits down and does that, and they get aligned on how that's going to look, it everything else flows from there. Because some of the big holdups when you're talking to folks about planning is, well, we don't know what we're going to need for retirement. We're not really willing to give up control because we still need access to cash. Well, you can give up control and still find ways to generate that cash through rents and all of that. And I think sometimes we forget that that is an option. The other big thing is, what do I need for nursing home care or long-term care? And so it used to be that there were available these, and they're still available, they're just expensive,
Mhm.
long-term care policies that would fund part of that, and by way of insurance, fund part of your care. Now those products look a little bit different. Maybe they're a hybrid type of product, I would call them. So in Farm Bureau world, we have like a daily living benefit rider, which is really just kind of like a chronic illness type of rider on a life insurance policy that you can utilize some of that cash value from your life insurance. You either use it during your life for your care for uh, any chronic illness, but you get to choose where you use that, or you get it in death benefit, and maybe that death benefit goes to the kids to equalize things, or maybe it's used to fund a buyout of a sibling or something like that. So that world looks a little bit different. But I think really thinking that through, I've seen a lot of farm families when they've gone through that financial planning process, then they say, okay, well, wait, we're probably going to be okay,
Sure.
and it takes that fear out of it. Then planning flows from there. Another place you could start would maybe be figuring out how you're going to transition machinery.
Okay.
That's one thing where we have a lot of farm families that maybe the next generation starts slowly buying into the line of equipment. They start making some of those purchases. And so that's one way to kind of start relinquishing some control, some of the overhead, some of the cost, and working them into it. There are ways to gift that machinery. There's ways to sell it to the next generation. However, you want to be careful about taxes. And,
Right.
of course, that's always something that's in the background, but making sure that you've got a good tax preparer, CPA, accountant that understands farming, number one, and farm tax because it's a whole different animal. And then number two, can have those talks with you about what you really want to do, right? And if you have that, that process becomes a lot easier. So one thing I think people forget is a lot of our farm equipment is depreciated out, right? And we know that because we have IRS rules that say you can quickly depreciate your equipment. Well, the problem is there's zero tax basis associated with that now. So if you sell it, you incur income tax. And even if you try to sell it on contract, you're incurring that income tax in year one. Because of course, IRS wants their money back right
Mhm.
away. There's ways to navigate those issues. It's just making sure that you work with the right person to help you. It's another way you could start the process.
One of the things that you posed to the group during your presentation was the 4 Ds. Do you want
Okay.
to share that with our listeners of the just different considerations people should keep in mind? I think those are always some interesting aspects.
Well, I think it goes back to when we think of transferring the family farm, we always think about estate planning.
Mhm.
Estate planning is just a piece of your overall succession plan, how you're going to transition the farm to that next generation, how you're going to accomplish that by things you do during your life and things you do at your death, which would be estate planning. So we kind of focus on when we think about these things, well, there's other stuff that happens, and they're the things we kind of don't like to talk about. Disability, you have a farm
Mhm.
accident, divorce, which is an unfortunate thing that we probably all have a story of someone either in our family or a close acquaintance that's gone through that. And then dissolution, which really is just maybe you're in business with your sibling. It comes time that okay, we're getting older, we both have children, we need to dissolve that business and try to transition it on to the younger generation, and how does that look? So those are the 4 Ds, and I think it's good to remember that there's more to it than just dying, right? There's
Sure.
and even for younger people, I think younger people, this is something when you're in the I'm in that busy point in my life right now where my kids are busy and they're running around, and I don't like to think about all of this stuff right now.
Right.
You don't think about what if an accident happened? What would happen with my family? So I always tell younger people, younger farmers and their families, make sure you have those core documents in place, like powers of attorney. You need somebody appointed to be able to act for you if, like, from a financial standpoint, you can't do it at that time, or from a medical standpoint, you can't make a decision because you're incapacitated in some way. Um, and a will, just a standard last will and testament that you have as spouses, that if God forbid something happens to both of you, you get to make the decisions on who's the guardian of your kids, who's going to take care of finances and get your kids raised. And so that's really important as well. So there's a lot of things that kind of go into that, but don't disregard the 3 other Ds, is what I would say.
And I wrote down too during your presentation of like these components are all just one piece of the puzzle, right? Really the whole process is a strategy. What is your strategy for making sure that your farm land, whatever it looks like, is getting passed on to the next generation?
Mhm.
And I guess, like, how often are you suggesting that people look at these pieces, at least, like, the will and the different documents?
Yeah, I think sometimes when you say every 3 to 5 years and you're an attorney and saying that, sometimes people assume, well, they just want billable hours or come in
Mhm.
and
Oh,
have a
yeah, they just want my
conversation.
money.
Yeah, but I will tell you, and I'm saying this just based on experience, not because I'm an attorney, spending a little bit of money or something that it maybe feels expensive at the time, right? To set up a trust or, you know, establish a will, go talk to your attorney, spend an hour with them just talking about this. The problems that that can avoid in the future, that money will be well spent. You will not regret it. I don't know hardly anybody that regrets paying the bill if it's reasonable to an attorney that helps them have these conversations and have peace of mind instead of feeling like things are up in the air. And also the eventual fight that happens when you don't talk. I mean, that's the expensive part, let me tell
Mhm.
you, is hiring litigators and trial attorneys to hash some of these things out if they're unclear when you die. That's where it really gets costly. So, um, spend that money. I would say every 3 to 5 years would be a good rule of thumb, and especially if something big has changed in your life, a death of a spouse, or um, your operation has changed significantly, or you've sold a business, you've changed how your operation looks. You should probably go in and have those documents looked at.
Yeah, absolutely makes sense. Another phrase that was kinda interesting just for people to think about was you talked about being a family first business versus being a business first family. And I think this topic, we think about our farm families and we think about all the dynamics. What's the difference between those 2? I just think that was a
Yeah.
really interesting way to look at this process.
This was something that we talk about a lot, and a family first family. Of course, we're all family first, right?
Mhm.
I understand, and I think you can maybe it takes growing up on a farm, being a farm kid, to understand how unique a farming business really is, and that your family is deeply rooted in that business, so it's really hard to separate the two. If you can focus on being more of a business first family, that's where what you're doing is you're putting a little more structure around it. You're having business meetings instead of talking about some of these important issues that are related to the farm business on a holiday or at the spur of the moment or when people are emotional. Operating it like a business and having these conversations like any other small business would have them is just it's a game changer. And so it kind of helps take some of the emotion out of it. Of course, that emotion's always going to be there a little bit, but just looking at it like we're going to reserve that time to treat our farm business just as that, as a business. It involves family, but we've got to have that structure. So if we have a farm meeting, and we're talking about succession or what we're going to do for the next year, we're putting together an agenda. And if we do that, we listen, right? We respect our business partners. If at a business meeting here at Farm Bureau, probably wouldn't say the same things that I would in a family meeting to my siblings or to my sister or to my parents. So having some of that like decorum and business, treating it like a business, I think really changes the dynamic a lot. And so again, there's help for that. We have a lot of resources within the Farm Bureau family that we can help families kind of get to that point where they can have a productive business meeting and talk about these things.
Yeah, and I think it makes the point too that you said it doesn't mean that you're putting the family not first, but it's almost like you're respecting the family enough to have the business conversation separate. It's like
Yeah.
just that makes a lot of sense. And I think that that is a really good point of if you don't know where to start, we'll have the conversation at the right time in the right place because you're with your family in a lot of places a lot of the time when you're working with them full time.
Mhm.
So,
Yep.
reading the room or reading the barn might be a really good tip for some of our listeners and probably one that if my family listens to, they would say, maybe you should take your own advice.
Oh, and we still do it. Like, it'll be the holidays and I'll walk into a room and my brother-in-law, my husband and my dad are talking about something about the farm, and I'm like, "Well, wait, what were you guys talking about?" My mom and my sister and I were doing something with the kids, or usually it's my mom, right? The grandkids want my mom. And
Mhm.
so, and and if you know my family, nobody's making a decision unless my mom's involved. So might as well just stop the conversation and bring her in, and we're all
Mhm,
there because that's the fair way to do it. My
mhm,
parents are so good at they've farmed together for so many years along with my uncles that if one of them is not there, something's missing. And so I think also including the right people in the conversation. So a colleague always says this, if you don't include your spouses, right? So the in-laws, or
mhm.
could be an outlaw, hopefully
I
not.
was gonna say, sometimes referred to as
Yeah.
outlaws.
Yeah. If you don't include them, what do you come back and say? Like, I would probably add a little emotion to it. I would say, well, somebody brought this up or whatever. My husband would be like, it's fine. It was good. And that would be about it. And so, having everybody hear the same message at some point, it doesn't mean that you have to bring in the spouses, right away. But I think at some point, everybody should hear it at the same time.
Mhm.
So that's just something I've learned along the way.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I also think that when you talk about, planning, siblings that are part of the family but not part of the farm always come up a lot. And
Mhm.
so
Yeah.
what kind of advice do you have in this space as far as, like, things that you've seen as options or just how to play that, right versus fair game? Talk about that a little bit.
I think there's a few things that you can do to make this more positive for both sides. And I don't even mean to say sides, like there should never have been sides, right?
Mhm,
If you were running another small business and someone had gone to school to be educated to do that job and one of their siblings hadn't, would you give them the same amount of that operation?
mhm,
Probably not. And so I think looking at it under the lens of we need to make sure that maybe the off farm, I'll call them the off farm heirs, right? Or siblings, that they understand still and feel a part of the farming operation, in that they understand where the struggles are, the pain points. Maybe they understand and it doesn't have to be into the weeds, but they understand that maybe on-farm air and parents have been making joint investments in things, that this isn't just mom and dad, you know, without an exchange of either labor or whatever, that siblings understand that. I think that gets lost. I think sometimes they don't feel a part of it anymore. They get disconnected, and then they don't remember, like, hey, you look at a piece of land and you look at it for what its fair market value is on the market. You don't look at what's the value of that to a sibling that's probably never going to sell it and is going to keep it in the family to provide for their livelihood. And so I think that those are things that often get overlooked.
So, talking about just the importance of communication, we hit on that kind of right when we started talking.
Yeah.
And what kind of like tips or tips or tricks? Maybe I don't know if we want to say tricks with this, but what should people be doing when it comes to communication about being clear and not having that mystery after someone passes of finding out the plan?
Well, I mean, the first thing seems pretty obvious, but tell your kids what the plan is.
Step one.
Yes, step one. And maybe you start with communicating with your on farm air, if you have one, and you have those talks. And then you talk to the other kids. You have a family meeting, you communicate it. If you need help in that communication portion, typically, I know as an attorney, I'm always happy to help a family have that conversation. Not all attorneys might be, but I think the vast majority that function in this space of agricultural law and farm estate planning kind of know that it's pretty important to be able to communicate that. And they can do it in a way that's not overwhelming, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think you have to hear it from mom and dad first. Because if it's a surprise to someone, if all of a sudden they're not inheriting the same amount and they don't understand why, and they haven't been involved in the operation for a long time, it's become this distant memory to them. And maybe it's just more about money than it is about the actual farm like it used to be. And so you got to hear from mom and dad. I truly believe that if mom and dad communicate what the plan is in some way, some effective way that's clear, and
Mm-hmm.
they communicate if there's changes, that cuts down the vast majority of the feuds that we see about this. You may be mad at your mom and dad for a little while over something you don't fully agree with. Most likely you'll forgive them. With a sibling, and if they have to be the one to convey the message that this is what mom and dad chose to do, they're always going to blame you. And
Mm-hmm.
if they don't agree and don't understand. And your family grows too. So, I mean, we've all had that situation where gosh, now, we have kids and grandkids and life gets busy and maybe we're not focusing as much on our extended family, and so that's where you get married too. You have different things that are pulling you in different directions. It's harder to communicate as siblings. Mom and dad are that link to having that communication. If you really can't do it, there are resources within either the extension service, maybe the universities have some resources. There are professionals that actually help have these conversations. There's family counselors. I mean, it
Mm-hmm.
may even get to that point where first we need to evaluate and try to help the emotional part of our family dynamic before we can engage in figuring out what the future holds. And that may be where you need to start if you're at a standstill.
Yeah, and if I remember right, in the next how many years we're transferring 70% of land? Is it 10 years?
70% in the US. Yeah, in the next 2 decades.
In the next 2 decades. So I think that is like if we can get a message across all of rural America
Yeah.
is we need to work together to make sure that this land transfer happens in a really, in the most positive way possible, and making sure that our rural landscape stays a rural landscape. And that
Hmm.
might look different. I mean, it might not be a family member taking that over, but for it to stay in you know farming, or
Yeah.
some kind of state that supports rural lifestyles, I think is really important. What kind of
Yeah.
resources are out there, whether it's through you guys, or, if people are like, okay, I need to take the first step, like, where are some guiding points that we can direct people?
Yeah. So you phrase that really well. And I think that most of us involved, you know, farming have this want and need to pass along that legacy. And
Hmm.
I think most of the families, even if they don't have an heir, would sure love something that they built to pass on to another farmer. And every year I go to the young farmer conferences and I see, within Farm Bureau, and I see a lot of young people that would love the opportunity to be able to farm and have that lifestyle for their family. And so it may look a little bit different, but I think that's something that there are resources to help. So whether it's at the federation level, trying to find link those, have a connection with a younger person if you don't have an heir. Farm Bureau Financial Services and Rural Mutual have some resources available as well. And that would be we have consultants who work in this area. We call them wealth management consultants or advisors. Really what they can do is they can sit down and have these conversations. They're trained to have some of these conversations, do a financial analysis for you of what you need in your retirement, all of those things. At least that can be a third party that can help get you started. As a consultant, extension service, a lot of times the farm management consultants can help. And there are private companies that engage in this as well. And so if you're looking for those, just reach out to your federation or to, farm your agent, your rural mutual agent should have the ability to find out, where to go and who to talk to. So that's part of my job, right? That's a big part of my job, is trying to make sure that our agents that work with farm families and understand their farms and truly want to help them understand what resources are out there to get people to plan, because it's coming, change is coming,
Mhm.
and what we want to do is be as ready for it as we can.
Yeah, absolutely. And what you just said reminded me, have you heard the song? It's a collaboration song called MacArthur.
Yes, I did.
Okay.
Yes, yes.
You
Yes.
if you haven't listened to it fully, you should because it's a collaboration between Tim McGraw, Hardy, Eric Church, and Morgan Wallen. And I think when we think about that change coming, it is coming,
Mhm.
and there's two different directions it can take. And so let's,
Mhm.
you know, grab it by the horns and do it right because, when you pass on, what are you going to pass on? I
Yeah,
think that's a really important thing.
exactly. Like, what's going to make you want to take the initiative and do this and understand that it is critically important. And I can tell you that it is from my experience. I love all of those artists, by the way. I've heard snippets of it. My
Mhm.
husband's really into Hardy right now, so I'm gonna have to listen to that in full on the way home and tell
Oh
him like
yeah,
I'm a Hardy
you're going to
fan now.
love it.
That's
You're gonna
awesome.
love it. It's been on
Yeah.
repeat, for me for a couple weeks. It's a really good collaboration, good artist, but the message I think is just it
Yeah.
really hits home why we really do need to do this right. So
Mhm.
that's all the questions
That's
I had
good.
for you. I do just like to end with some quick fire questions, just
Mhm.
kind of wrap up in a fun way. I know
Yeah.
succession planning and I mean lawyer attorney topics aren't always the most like
Uh,
jazzy. So we'll end on a fun
exciting.
note.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I promise I am a fun person sometimes.
I know that. I've
I'm
only met
just
you a couple
kidding.
times now, but I can vouch for that. I
Well,
think
I
that
try. I
that could
try.
be like your slogan, like most fun Midwest attorney there ever was,
Yes.
or something.
Yes. I'm sure my parents would be like, "Yeah, she's still goofy. It's fine."
I love that though. All right, rapid fire. Chocolate milk or white milk?
I like chocolate milk.
Good
Love it.
choice.
My son
Yeah.
loves it. My
Mhm.
daughter loves white milk. I don't know why.
Yeah, well, there's two kinds. So,
Yeah. Yeah. You're right. There's 2 kinds for a reason.
yeah. All right, red tractors or green tractors?
Green. We used to be red back in the day, but there was a John Deere dealer closer to our house,
Mhm.
so I would say I'm pretty green now these days.
Okay. And you just recently spent some time in Wisconsin, so I'm gonna ask you, what's your favorite cheese?
I love a good cheddar, a sharp cheddar. My family's been going up to Northwest Wisconsin in the summer for as long as I can remember, and the Burnett Dairy has
Mhm.
some amazing cheese, and another cheese, I love the warm cheese curds when they're just like right when they're, fresh.
Mhm.
That's awesome.
Oh yeah, it's a staple, but I mean, it's hard to pick. We have like more than 600 varieties, I think now, so it's like,
Mhm.
yes, it's probably more overwhelming than succession planning, to be honest.
Yes, cheese can be very overwhelming. I like it in a lot of different forms though. So,
Yes, and that's all we
not
really need to
picky.
know. All right, what is your favorite holiday?
I think the obvious answer would be Christmas just because I love to decorate my house and things, but I think the older I've gotten and the more life experiences I've had, I've realized I just like those holidays where we just get together and there's not the pressure of gifting and all
Mhm.
of that. So I love the 4th of July. That's
Yeah,
probably my favorite now.
and warmer.
Also warmer. Sometimes hot. Sometimes like hotter than I'd like it to be, but
Two different spectrums of yeah,
yeah.
temperature there, but
Yeah. Yep.
I can appreciate that. And then
Mhm.
my last quick fire question, I'm assuming that you've been to a good amount of Farm Bureau meetings. So I've never asked somebody this question before, but I feel like it's appropriate for you. What is your favorite Farm Bureau meal?
Oh, I mean, I've had so many different ones, and they're all, I mean, in Iowa, and I've also learned in Wisconsin, every state we have, I mean, nobody knows how to serve a meal like Farm Bureau,
Oh
right?
yeah,
You get people in the seats with that meal. So,
correct.
and there's so many awesome caterers from like every different town that you go to. So I would say I'm I'm like meat and potatoes girl. I
Hmm.
really do love the cheesy potatoes and like a good roast. That's probably my favorite.
Yes, and I think some people who are not, familiar with Farm Bureau would be like, wait, you have cheesy potatoes and a roast at a meeting? Oh, you betcha. And then we keep
Oh,
going with the meeting. Like
oh
like
yeah.
that's just like the midday snack. You can just
Yes.
wait for the dessert table to come out.
Do you guys
I've got,
call it a casserole up there, or is it like a hot dish or
It
something?
depends. For Wisconsin, we're a little bit split. Maybe I'll get some heat for this from some listeners, but
Yeah.
I think it kind of splits down the middle. I grew up
Yeah.
on the eastern side of the state. I say casserole. My husband's from the
Mhm.
west side of the state. He says hot dish more often, I think.
Oh,
So I
yeah.
think it depends on the territory in our state. I'm not
I
sure,
know.
but I think we're a little splitsies on that.
Yeah, I get it. I get it. I think we are in Iowa too. I don't like if it's a regional split or I was always casserole, but
Yeah.
whatever it is, I like it.
Yeah, goulash. I mean, honestly, if it's warm, looks decent, and is on a
Hmm.
plate, I'll probably try it at least. So,
Yeah, chances are high. I've probably tried a
especially if I
fair
didn't cook
amount
it.
of casseroles or hot dishes in my life.
If I didn't have to cook it, I probably will try it too
That
because that
also
just
makes me happy because we're building a house on my family farm and which is awesome. I'm so excited about it, but we have like this makeshift kitchen right now in a camper. So life is weird for our family
Mhm,
right now and I despise cooking right now.
I'm
I
sure.
can't wait until I have an actual kitchen. So that will be fun.
Well, you probably have been signing up for even more Farm Bureau meetings then because you always get a good meal, so
I'm not gonna lie, like if it was so fun to come up to Wisconsin and sleep in a hotel. Maybe not the camper bed,
yeah.
but it was and to see all of you. I mean, it
Oh,
was
yeah, for sure.
very selfless. Yes.
Yeah, way to circle back on that. But
Yeah.
yeah, I just thought you might appreciate that meeting because I know, I've talked to my fellow Farm Bureau staff and we always joke about the food. Like, if you want to be full, just come to a Farm Bureau meeting and we'll
Yep.
make sure that happens. So full of information and food. Maybe that's a
Yeah.
great way to phrase that. But
Yes, I love it.
all right, well, thank you so much for joining us, Erin, and really
Thank you.
important topic. So thanks for being willing, and hopefully
Yeah.
people will take advice and get to looking at those succession plans.
Well, we're here to hope, and I know it can be daunting sometimes, but just look at it as a process and use the resources that you have and utilize your team and you'll get there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks for
All
having
right.
me.
Yeah, thanks much.
Okay. Take care, Amy.
Farming is more than a job. It's a way of life that comes with tough challenges. That's why I am proud to be a member of Wisconsin Farm Bureau. They've helped me grow as a leader and prepare me to face whatever comes next. And now I'm part of shaping a better future for Wisconsin agriculture by making my voice heard. Let's grow together. Become a member today.